The Retirement Cafe podcast, a neuroscientist's guide to aging well with Dr. Daniel Levitin. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast with me, your host, Justin King. If you're thinking about your retirement or already retired, you're in the right place. My aim is to help you plan for and live a successful and meaningful retirement. Retirement is far more than just a financial event. It's a significant life event, a major transition, which will bring with it new challenges and opportunities. So each episode contains tips, information, and inspiration to help you feel more informed and confident about your retirement. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you've joined me for the latest episode of the podcast. This week, I'm really excited to share with you a conversation I was honoured to have recently with the award-winning neuroscientist, musician, and best-selling author, Dr. Daniel Levitin. To give you an idea of Daniel's status, his TED Talk entitled How to Stay Calm When You Know You'll Be Stressed has had 17 million views. Daniel's research centres around music, the brain, health, productivity and creativity. As a musician, he's produced and consulted on albums and artists by artists including Stevie Wonder, Steely Dan, Joni Mitchell, and on the films Good Will Hunting and Pulp Fiction. Daniel has been awarded 17 gold and platinum records. As a public speaker, he has given presentations on the floor of Parliament in London, to the US Congress, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. Daniel is also the author of 4 best-selling books that span all areas of expertise. They are This Is Your Brain on Music, The World in 6 Songs, and The Organized Mind. And in December 2020, his latest book, The Changing Mind, A Neuroscientist's Guide to Aging Well, was published here in the UK. In this book, Daniel uses science to show how we can successfully age. This book is really quite extraordinary. As a brief synopsis, the book explains that we have long been encouraged to think of old age as synonymous with deterioration. Yet recent studies show that our decision-making skills improve as we age and our happiness levels peak in our 80s. So what really happens to our brains as we get older? In our conversation, Daniel explains just that. We discuss how we can continue to learn despite the structure of the brain changing as we age. I asked Daniel to debunk some of the myths that surround aging, such as the idea that our memory declines as we get older. We also discussed Daniel's fascinating musical career, and he shares with me how he recently got back into the recording studio to create his own music. You will find information about pre-ordering Daniel's forthcoming album in the show notes at theretirementcafe.co.uk. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the inspirational Dr. Daniel Levitin as much as I did. So, welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Dr. Daniel Levitin.
Thank you, Justin.
Great to see you. Great to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time to get up early this morning and have a chat. I know you're a busy man. So just in context, we're talking on the 17th of February in case we find out how are you coping with the new world order or the world order that's presented to you at the moment?
Well, Justin, I think, it's surreal for me as it is for most people in the world that this kind of unended open uncertainty is quite stressful, even if it's not stressful in the way that being attacked by a lion is or just averting an automobile accident. It's a chronic low-grade stress, and I suspect that most people in the world are suffering from chronic low-grade depression. You think about the major life stressors that there are, and these include the dissolution of relationships, a sudden change in routine, uncertainty about your financial or your health future, and we've got all of those going on. I mean, the dissolution of relationships is more subtle here, but we used to, most of us, see people at work every day, and we had these even micro contacts, just, hi, how are you, Joe, kind of moments. And those have disappeared, and they're tremendously important for our sense of well-being. And so I think my grandfather always used to say the definition of a bore is when somebody asks you, how are you? He actually tells you. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm doing better than most. I'm very lucky. I have work that I can do from home and that's meaningful to me. I have friends and colleagues like yourself all over the world that I can touch base with on this miraculous technology without leaving my home. So apart from the fact that the world is going to heck in a handbasket, I think I'm doing okay.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So we can touch on so many things. But for those who don't know you, you're a musician, a psychologist, a neuroscientist, and an author. I mean, that's a lot to pack into life. So tell me, how have you arrived at where you are today?
Well, I took a left turn at Albuquerque. I just always did what interested me, and I wasn't very practical in terms of financial planning or thinking this is what I need to do to have a solid career. And it turned out that in my case, against all odds, it worked out. I'm able to make a living, but I wouldn't advise anyone else to do what I did, which is to just do things that are fun for you. I'd always been interested in science and in the arts, and always was an avid reader. I was somewhat of a loner child, and so books and music were my refuge, and science, math problems. And so after I left childhood for adulthood, I just kept pursuing the same three, and it's been great. That it's been very rewarding. I make a little time each day for all three of those things: science and music and writing.
It's fantastic that you managed to get balance there. Did you, in your 20s, were you drawn to one particular thing?
Well, it's interesting you ask, because I started out as a math major at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I dropped out in order to pursue music, which I did almost exclusively for 15 years. And then decided to go back to school because in my 30s, I realized that the music industry was imploding. And I really did need to have a financial plan, which was to earn a salary of some kind. So I went back to school to get my bachelor's degree, and I had so much fun, I kept going. So in my 20s, I had no idea what I was doing. In fact, at no point in my life, Justin, did I know what I was doing, and I still don't. And what I mean by that is I've always made plans, like this is what I'm going to do, and this is where I'm going to be a year from now or 5 years from now, and not a single one of them ever came true. I'm a very bad prognosticator. I would do terrible in your job as a wealth manager and financial planner, because every prediction I make fails to come true. I'm like George Costanza in the Seinfeld episode where he realizes he has to do the opposite of every single instinct he has, but can't bring himself to. So the reality is that nothing I wanted to have happened happened. I was going to be a great electric guitar front of the stage guy like Jimmy Page, or I was going to be a great novelist like John Irving. Those things didn't happen, but different things happened, and I learned to be flexible and take what comes.
Yeah, but I mean, there's for all of us, I suppose, and obviously our audience is generally retirees or people thinking of retirement. But I often think that it may even go younger than that, and especially in this current. I'm very conscious that people, I know that the redundancy rate and the unemployment rate in over 50s is suddenly spiked in the UK because of the pandemic. And I'm sure it's probably common across the world. And, you know, the people may think, well, I've spent 20, possibly 30 years of a career doing something. And that's what I've learned. And I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, you know, actually, if we can learn to be really flexible and shift just because our plan was to do something and to eke out our time or to serve our time doing one type of career, you can shift.
You can shift, and you can shift at any age. There are ample examples of this, and it's important to shift. There are neurochemical changes that happen in the brain and neurostructural changes, physical changes, not just chemistry, starting at the age of 60 that cause us to become a little bit less likely, most of us, less likely to want to try new things, a little more complacent, a little more, I think I'll just stay at home. And we can fight that. It takes a bit of effort and determination, but the rewards are plentiful, and they include increased health span and lifespan, increased pleasure and engagement with life, continuing to do things and be flexible about what those things are is critical to being able to enjoy, say, Act 3 and Act 4 of your life. And there are plenty of role models. Take Jane Goodall, who I interviewed for my book. The book is called The Changing Mind in the UK. It's called Successful Aging in Other Territories. Same book, different title, long story. Jane Goodall is a well-known primatologist, spent most of her life doing field work. When I spoke to her, she had just turned 89. This was a year and a half ago. She had just landed at her family home in England, somewhat near you, I believe, and had gotten back from Africa and was about to head off again for another 3-day, in 3 days for another 3-week trip. Constantly on the move, but no longer primarily a primatologist. Jane Goodall has reinvented herself as an educator, and she goes around the world speaking to high school students, trying to recruit them to her foundation to help fight the effects of climate change and to protect rainforests and things like that, to be activists. Or another role model, Julia Hurricane Hawkins, a 104-year-old competitive runner from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who didn't even take up competitive running until she was 100, but took 2 gold medals in the senior games in 2019. And in fact, had never been particularly athletic until at age 75, she decided to become a competitive cyclist and broke a bunch of world records for seniors in cycling. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's all possible.
You can change.
Absolutely. So now, so I'm curious. So when I observe, my wife and I, Kathy, we've got 2 girls who are 11 and 9. And, I have a little mantra when they used to go off to school as I said, cheerio to them in the morning, be kind, be curious. And, it's just a little saying, and it's something that I would try and do myself each day. But the curious thing, I see, seems to wane. The curiosity that seems to, I see children, and there's a kind of, a relaxation as they move into work, and often the curiosity, the outside interest, as people sometimes get older, I kind of don't see them taking up as many new skills as they may have done before, but sometimes they do take on lots of new interests as they move into retirement. But what do you think, what's going on? I mean, I also hear the line again of, I wish I'd learned this. I wish I'd learned to play the piano when I was a child, or I learned to learn French, or, I'm old now and it's really hard to learn now. I think, what's your opinion of that?
Well, on the one hand, it is harder to learn now. It's the brain's fault. The brain is configured during the first 12 years of your life to be maximally flexible and to learn just about anything. You can learn just about any language spoken on the planet before age 10, let's say, and end up speaking without an accent. You try to learn French after age 20, forget about it. I mean, everybody will know that it was your second language, no matter how hard you try. And with all those weird vowels, and Chinese, forget that. It's not just the vowels; it's the inflections and such. But it is harder, but not impossible. I know a number of people who are learning languages, spending the lockdown learning languages and new instruments, or playing an instrument for the first time. I've spent the lockdown playing the piano, which is an instrument I never really played, but always had to plink around with. And by golly, after a year of self-discipline, it's been okay. I'm not going to be taking the stage at Royal Albert Hall, other than to give a proms lecture again, I suppose. But I'm not going to be performing on the piano there. But I can entertain myself and my wife, and that's good enough. The curiosity component, though, I have to say, I don't consider myself particularly intelligent, and I imagine my neuroscience colleagues have the same opinion of me. But I do have two qualities that I was very lucky to be born with. One is curiosity, and the other is stick-to-itiveness. And they're not things that you can turn on or off. There's certainly things you can cultivate in yourself and improve. But those account for a whole lot more than people give them credit for. When I say you can't turn them on or off, I hope your daughters get to the point where curiosity is a habit of mind, that it's the way they approach the world. It's the way they approach everything they encounter. They are walking to school and they see a rock they've never seen before, and instead of being in a hurry, they stop and pick it up and they look at it and wonder why this is different from other rocks and how it got here and what story it might be able to tell. Or they encounter somebody at school who's new and from a different culture and speaks funny. And rather than wanting to stay away from the person, which is a natural, unkind human impulse, try to explore the differences and understand how that person has lived their life and what their experience has brought to them.
Yeah. And so coming back to kind of a curiosity in later life, taking on new skills, new challenges. I'm guessing that, you think that, learning the musical skills later on in life would be of a great benefit.
It is, but not uniquely. I want to be fair about that. I find it very rewarding to be learning a new instrument, and I have friends who have picked up instruments at age 60 for the first time, and they find it tremendously rewarding. A friend of mine, a leading geneticist in the world, Jasper Rhine, who runs a very large laboratory at UC Berkeley. I think he's 63, and he just started playing the guitar for the first time in his life, and he's doing terrific. Another neurologist friend, Scott Grafton, about 63, started playing banjo 3 years ago for the first time, and he's actually really good. But I want to be fair. Music provides this pleasure, so does learning a language, playing bridge, immersing yourself in any activity that's new to you is what's key, Justin. If you've been doing crossword puzzles for the last 20 years, no brain benefit in continuing to do it, other than the pleasure you derive. If you've never done them, that'll open up your mind to a different way of thinking.
Yeah. Wow. So just changing course slightly. You tell a story of I think it was on your TED talk about not being able to get in one night. And we'll provide a link in the show notes for it. But anyway, you had to break in, and you got in through the window, and it was freezing cold outside, and then you had to shoot off the next morning and forgot your passport. And it was one of those compounding evenings into a bit of a nightmare. And you reflected on when you finally did get on your flight. You reflected on the response that you'd had to a kind of
a fairly disastrous evening, and how you dealt with it. Coming back to our original, right at the beginning of the conversation, about how you was just saying, we're all probably feeling levels of stress in this pandemic that we haven't felt before, and there will be some people feeling, horrendous because business failures and losing loved ones and all those types of things, and then there'll be others who possibly less so, but also are still feeling, this lack of connection, etc. What's your advice to people of how they can, how they can maneuver and shift through this world that we're currently living in?
Well, so the lesson I took from that window story that you referred to, I was actually flying to London from Montreal. It was the dead of winter. I was leaving early in the morning. I had gotten all the way to the airport and realized I didn't have my passport. And I had to go home, and then I realized I didn't have my keys. Break a window, dead of winter, get the passport, call somebody to come and board up the window, made my flight. And it got me thinking, I need to be more planful and think about things that could go wrong in my life, even if they're unlikely, because if the cost of something going wrong, like missing a flight to England and a whole book tour, all of that, the cost is high enough, it's worth putting a system in place to prevent it from happening. It's basically why we have fire insurance. The likelihood of any individual person's house burning down in his or her lifetime is very, very low. But the financial cost and the cost of hassle of not having access to your bank accounts and all these things, we get insurance to mitigate the damage. And so while I was on the plane that morning, I emailed my friend Danny Kahneman, the author of that great book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I told him about it. He says, oh, well, you know what you need to do? You need to do a premortem. And when a Nobel Prize winner tells you to do something, you take it seriously. And the premortem is simply a postmortem in reverse. Not what did go wrong and how did we end up with this dead body, but what could go wrong and what systems do you put in place. And in that particular instance, I installed a lockbox outside the house with a combination, and it held the key to the house. And I have that still. And then I set a designated place in my bedroom where my passport and my keys and my wallet always go, so that I know where they are all the time. They're not just haphazardly thrown somewhere. Now, you may wonder why the digression into this and what it has to do with the question you asked. A premortem for us during the pandemic, a premortem for us during the pandemic and during retirement years is just taking an honest and a frank, self-critical look at what could go wrong in my life. Am I living near enough a medical facility that I can get there in time? If I'm not, do I want to consider moving? Or do I want to consider making some kind of arrangement where I can get to where I need to go? Do I maybe want to stock up on some prescription drugs that I might need to carry me over? Many doctors, even in the NHS, would be willing, under these circumstances, if you're living remotely, to give you a prescription of antibiotics or antivirals just to have on hand in case you can't get to a clinic or a hospital because you live remote. I believe that's true of the NHS. I've heard of it.
Yeah, I agree.
I am not an employee of the NHS. I cannot represent it with certainty. But the other things are a little more mundane. We're in this lockdown. The older among us are more vulnerable. Part of the premortem is I don't want to get lonely and depressed, so I'm going to schedule time to talk to people either on the phone or on Zoom, or when appropriate, a socially distanced coffee outside. And I'm going to make sure it's in the calendar, and that at least on a regular basis, whatever regular is for you, whether it's once a day or once a week or once every fortnight, I'm going to have human contact and make sure that I get it. In parallel, I'm going to set aside some kind of a bucket list. I've always wanted to do X. I'm going to spend 15 minutes a day doing that through the lockdown.
Yeah.
At least 15 minutes.
So in your book, you cover a couple of things that I want to ask you about. The myth that memory always declines with age. Is that true?
The myth is not true. It is a myth. We have this societal narrative that memory will inevitably decline, and it won't necessarily. For some of us, yes. Some of us will have Alzheimer's, other kinds of cognitive impairment or memory loss. But for most of us, it's not necessarily a certainty. The fact is, with every decade after 40, our brain processing speed slows down, our reaction time, our ability to find words. But that's not a failing of memory. That's a failure of processing speed. You just have a slower computer, but you eventually get the answer. And I think the myth is best exposed by looking at the reality, which is that, if a 70-year-old loses their cell phone or forgets their computer password, they're likely to say, this is Alzheimer's, this is the beginning of the end. But 20-year-olds are doing those things all the time. As a college professor, I can attest to that. They lose their cell phones, they forget their computer passwords all the time. But they tell themselves a different story. I had too much to drink last night, I didn't sleep enough, I got too much on my plate. Same behavior, two different stories. Not failing memory in either case, the normal, fallible human memory in both cases.
Yeah. So it's the story we tell ourselves, and that's probably can morph into quite a few different topics, I think. Health span, not lifespan.
So we all know what lifespan is. It's the amount of time you have on the planet from when you're born to when you die, unless you're a Buddhist, and then you've got time after you die. The notion, though, is that for most of us, we have this big, you're born now and you're born here, and then you have this big span of time where you're more or less healthy, say for occasional broken leg or something, and then you get sick towards the end of your life and you remain sick until you die. So you got health span and you have lifespan. And there are a lot of people trying to extend the lifespan, but that might simply extend the disease span. I'm more interested in extending the health span within whatever lifespan you have. And that's what the book is ultimately about. Things we can do to live healthier longer, whether we actually live longer or not.
So what are you doing to live healthier?
Well, all the things we've been talking about. I'm trying to maintain as interesting a routine and as social a routine as possible during the lockdown. I'm conscientious about sleep. I follow good sleep hygiene. There's a whole chapter on sleep in the book. I try to maintain a good diet, exercise a little every day, and try new things. I've been pushing myself to try new things. And I'll give you two examples if you like.
Yeah, great.
When I'm 63 now. When I was 58 and I was starting the research for the book and realized I had to push myself outside my comfort zone, the first thing I did was get my private pilot's lesson. Why? Because I'm deathly afraid of heights. And I thought, if I don't overcome this now, it's never going to be overcome. And flying a plane seems kind of crazy. So I flew 75 hours, did my training, did a few solo flights. It was amazing. The other thing was I decided that although I never did become that Jimmy Page at the front of a stage, I did have 40 years worth of music playing and songwriting behind me. And I decided I wanted to take more seriously that side of my life. And so I hooked up with a couple of songwriting mentors. I figured it's too late for me to be a guitar god or, a crooner, but maybe I can be a songwriter. It's okay for songwriters to be older. So I was very lucky in that two great songwriters, Rodney Crowell out of Nashville and Joni Mitchell, Canadian-American songwriter. Joni lives near me in Hollywood, and Joni and I have been friends for 25 years. Both of them agreed to mentor me, not to be teachers, but to mentor me in the songwriting. And it was amazing because I learned a lot. After 5 years of working at it, I got to the point where each of them independently said, "You ought to release an album. These are songs I want to hear, and I want to hear them recorded properly." So I released an album in January of 2020, went on tour with it, with a bass player named Victor Wooten, who some of your listeners may know, 5-time Grammy winner, and recorded another album, which I'm getting ready to release this April. And Joni and Rodney think the second one's even better than the first. And I've been very lucky because even if nobody buys it, knowing that Joni likes it and Rodney likes it, that the members of Steely Dan who have heard it now, they all like it. That's good enough for me.
Yeah, brilliant.
But if people want to buy it, I'm happy to sell it through my website. I can give you a PayPal or a Venmo link for pre-orders if you want to post it. And
definitely.
I'm not trying to make any money on it, just trying to cover the costs of manufacturing. And I'll put it out on vinyl and CD.
Well, some of our listeners have probably still got a turntable, so
say it again.
So our listeners have probably got a turntable still, maybe. So
yeah.
Though vinyl is making a big comeback, so that's again, great illustration. The pilot's license, fantastic, and presumably your fear of heights has disappeared.
Oddly, no. I'm not afraid of being in an airplane anymore. Well, I was never afraid of being in an airplane. So I'm not afraid of being in an airplane or piloting one. But still, I don't want to climb the ladder up to the second story of the house and clean the leaves out of the gutter. I hire a handyman to do it for 40 quid.
Yeah. I mean, I have to always ask for these types of things, how much of a difference into your life would it be if you didn't have a fear of heights any longer?
Who knows? But I mean, what's the purpose of life other than to try and make the world a better place and maybe in the process make yourself a better person?
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think that getting a pilot's license made the world a better place, but it gave me more compassion and empathy for pilots and passengers, and I learned a bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah, yeah. You'll have to come and fly in the UK. We have weather here rather than California.
Well, I studied for the license in Montreal. Believe you me, we had weather.
Oh, okay. Because we always, I did my own PPL many years ago in my 20s, and a friend of mine had come to the US to do his helicopter's license, and we were always joking that he'd gone there obviously just because he could fly in blue skies all the day, and he'd be totally lost by the time he got back to the UK, So, but yeah, Montreal would have given you plenty of weather.
Did you train in a 172?
Cessna.
Yeah.
Was it 172 or 152? I think maybe.
Oh, the two-seater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, But yeah, some of those skills have probably left me by now. I haven't flown for many, many years.
I haven't either. My after I got my license, I got married, and my wife did not want me flying, and that's fine. I'd rather have a wife than an airplane.
Yes, absolutely, especially if it's either or. So, you cover in the book brain malleability. The being able to change your experience. Tell me more about that.
So another myth about the brain is that you stop growing new neurons and stop making new connections at some point. And that's just not true. We're growing new neurons all the time, right up to the end of life. And we're making new neural connections. Every time you learn something, that's a new neural pathway being constructed. Any new experience you have. And by building up these new neural pathways, we create a kind of cognitive reserve, which is equivalent to what weightlifters are building up with muscle reserve. So if somebody can bench press 250 pounds, they may not feel well on a particular day. They may have muscle aches or the beginnings of a cold. But they're still going to be able to do 100. I can't do 100. They've got reserve. And so the task for us over 60s is to build up enough brain pathways that if things start to slip due to disease or just age-related atrophy, we have so much reserve that we don't notice and our friends don't notice and we can push on. We don't yet know how to stave off Alzheimer's, if it's going to happen. We don't know how to push off the start date, but we sure know how to push off the start date of when you notice the symptoms.
Yeah. So what's the future for you, Daniel? What's the, you sound like you've achieved an amazing amount of things in the last few years with the amount of books and the music and obviously the recording and all this type of thing. What's the next 5 years look like? I mean, I appreciate, of course, it'll end up being very different to what you're going to tell me, but I'd like to know. I'd like to know where you're heading.
I'm a relative newcomer to this songwriting and touring business. I mean, I just say I've been doing it all along, but in the privacy of my own home, largely, or the privacy of recording studios, helping others with their recording. So because it's the beginning, I'm hoping to, in the next 5 years, once restrictions are lifted, to go back on tour, to perform in public. And I'm relatively new to writing books for a popular audience. This is my 5th book. I want to write more, and I love coming to England and doing book tours, and not just England, but Scotland, Ireland, coming to the UK and going around and meeting people and hearing what their concerns are. Often the idea for a new book comes from those in-person conversations. So I realize that I've described to you not doing anything new, but just doing more of what I've already been doing. I don't know that I'm contradicting my own advice in that these are, as I say, these are relatively new endeavors for me. And so they feel like I'm pushing boundaries and I'm doing new things, but I probably should try something utterly new, and I don't know what that will be. Maybe it'll be painting. My friend Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead just started doing exercises with a big iron ball at the end of a chain.
Right.
And he swears by them, and he's trying to get me to start taking lessons on that. So maybe that's what's next for me.
Yeah, sounds like you maybe increase the house insurance before you start.
Nicely played, Justin.
maybe your accident insurance at the same time. I'm not sure. Fantastic. So I think there's got to be something there with doing music in the Albert Hall along with the book talk. I think that there's got to be maybe some entwining there. I think it would provide a real unique perspective, maybe.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that has sort of happened organically already at a couple of the book talks I gave in London in 2020 before the lockdown. I don't remember if it was the Royal Society of Arts, the RSA, or one of the other venues, but in a couple of instances, they asked me to play some music along with talking about the book, and I was just delighted. And then Renee Fleming, the great American soprano with the Kennedy Center, has taken interest in brain health. And so she and I did a talk together under the auspices of the Kennedy Center, and then sang a song together.
Wow.
Just because we could. So yeah, it's a nice, it's kind of like a wine pairing.
Yeah. And a reflection, I do think when if you think about that journey of 20, 30 years of helping others create music and suddenly showing the world that your own music is in essence that kind of walking down the high street naked, isn't it? We could all write in a journal, but as soon as you actually publish it, you then open up your world to criticism, which of course sadly is a human being's often a human being's greatest fear.
Well, I'll tell you, I had a kind of epiphany about this. I was in Montreal seeing Van Dyke Parks, who's somewhat of a cult figure in pop music, but a wonderful musician. He was the orchestrator for Walt Disney's Jungle Book when he was just 16 years old.
Wow.
Wrote all those orchestral parts, wrote lyrics for the Beach Boys in the 60s. Amazing. And I went to see him, and the concert was just terrible.
Oh.
I didn't like it at all. Didn't like hearing him, didn't like what he was doing. And I left thinking, he had a bad night. I didn't think any less of Van Dyke Parks. I didn't love his music any less. I just thought, well, this night didn't work for me. And so I thought, yeah, people are going to like my music. They're not going to like my music. It'll come and go. That's okay.
Yeah.
I felt a little bit more naked now that 28 million people who watched the TED Talk know that I was such an idiot that I had to break my own window to get back in my house. That's the naked on High Street moment for me.
Yeah. Though I mean, I think you showed the vulnerability there and the lessons learned, and I think that pre-mortem advice is really critical. I think in your book you talk about about thinking about, okay, so at some point, if you're thinking about aging, at some point you're going to get ill. I mean, that's just it's kind of, well, you either fall off the cliff and just don't wake up one morning, or there will be some kind of decline in health. Have you planned for that? I mean, as an advisor, we're always putting into place wills and powers of attorney and all those types of things. And they're probably not, bizarrely, they're not something that people want to think about. But it is a bit like the fire insurance, as you mentioned. It's I always say to people, your house insurance is one of those premiums that you hope is a waste of money. You hope that you're tearing up the pounds or the dollar bills or whatever and throwing it away because there's no way you ever want to claim on the darn thing. And there's not many things that you willingly spend hoping to get no return for at all.
Well, charity.
I think the altruism is the feeling of goodness there. I mean, I don't feel a feeling of goodness when my house insurance is paid. I do.
Sure you do.
I feel reassurance.
Yeah, you feel peace of mind.
I feel peace of mind, but I think the altruism, we know, don't we, that we all have a sense of feeling of giving is much more beautiful than the receiving of gifts, I think, mostly.
Yeah, well, so we're all making gifts to the big insurance company.
Yeah, maybe we are. yeah, maybe they are. So I think this seems a natural closing point. I really enjoy chatting with you. What are the last words that you'd like to, I often ask a question which maybe fits in here. If I gave you a wish today, you can have a wish. One wish that in 12 months' time, something has happened to you in your life or into the world in general. What would it be?
Oh, wow. I mean, the cliche, of course, would be to wish for world peace. So I'm not going to go there. Of course, if you gave me one wish, I'd like to have 3 more wishes. That would be my one wish. But setting aside that kind of snark,
it can be selfish. It can be something solely for you.
Well, I mean, if it was solely for me, it would be that the ideas that I put out there in music or in writing are things that people find useful and entertaining and informative. That I'm able to reach people through what it is I put out there. But I'm not thinking that I would use my wish that way. I think a year from now, I'd like to see the major internet companies and internet service providers and news, sort of non-mainstream news sources, embrace the idea that there is really and truly an objective truth. There aren't 2 sides to a story when one side is a lie.
Mm.
We've kind of overcompensated as a society and said, oh, well, that's, so-and-so deserves their perspective. No, they don't. If it's wrong, if it's a lie, if it's totally made up. There are objective facts of the world that reasonable people agree on from different backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different economic backgrounds and perspectives. And we've fallen into what some have called the post-truth era. And if that's really true, that's the end of democracy, because we no longer will have an informed electorate. We no longer will be making decisions based on evidence. We're going back to the 1400s when it was all superstition. If your municipality decides that they get a bunch of money from the federal government to repave streets, are they going to repave the street in front of the wealthiest resident's house or in front of the mayor's house, or are they going to repave the streets that have the potholes? There's evidence there about where the work needs to be done.
Yeah.
You can't just say, well, one person's view of the most important street to pave, is as valid as any others.
No. I think those are wise words, and I'd love to grant you your wish, if I was so allowed. But let's hope. I'm sure, definitely, that your ideas and music are filtering into the world. I've very much enjoyed, consuming your writing. So, and I really very much enjoyed chatting with you this morning. So, thank you, Dr. Daniel Levitin.
Cheerio.
Thanks once again to Dr. Daniel Levitin for joining me and for such a fascinating conversation. To find out more about Daniel's books, including The Changing Mind, and pre-ordering his next album, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll find all those useful links. As ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to subscribe either on our website or your preferred podcast player so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me on Twitter at JustinKingCFP, or you can email me at hello@theretirementcafe.co.uk. So until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.